I may not have it at GCAS and as the horizon of my radical politics, but it's a step. It's a reformist step towards a more revolutionary ambition. And I appreciate the fact that you guys have this model where the students can learn without being destroyed by the process.
Oh, God, I know, right? All right, Doug, you take care, and I'm going to jump in the pool. See ya.
Okay. All right.
Did you get that?
I did.
Thanks, Creston. That was really beautiful.
The most orthodox of all Marxist economists I have ever met.
The reason why I'm still a Marxist is that I claim that this structure of belief, of displaced belief, you find it in what Marx described as commodity fetishism.
That all really dialectical and intelligent human beings will have a sense for evil and some sympathy for the devil, or they will be just a little stifled and bored. I think that's not wrong. Just a little sympathy for the devil won't hurt.
Inside Critical Theory brings you this Diet Soap interview. Is that that's a real background? It's not.
Yeah, it's my place in Florida.
Oh, how nice for you.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's beautiful. This is my place in Portland. It's all I ever see.
That's great. I was thinking I could jump in the pool with my with like a margarita and then say, "Oh, hey Doug, what's up? Oh, you want to do a podcast? Give me a second." Anyway,
how nice for you, Creston. Okay, so but despite his luxurious background, Creston is on the left. Creston Davis is the founder and director of the Global Center for Advanced Studies. He is the chancellor and CEO of GCAS College Dublin. He is the creator and co-edits the Insurrections, Critical Studies in Religion, Politics, and Culture series, which is an academic book series published by Columbia University Press. And going forward, GCAS and Diet Soap Media will be establishing a partnership wherein Creston will help me line up some of the most interesting public intellectuals as guests, and we'll be directing people to GCAS from our YouTube channel and podcast. So also, Creston, I expect one day to get a chance to jump into that pool. That's another part of the deal.
Come on over. There's some margaritas waiting for you.
Okay. I'm not, it's 11 a.m., so that's an hour before I start drinking.
Yeah, but it's Sunday, fun day. Oh, it's an hour. Okay, good. So you have an hour to get here. That shouldn't be super hard to figure out.
All right. So Creston, what is GCAS and what is its mission? How did you get it started and why?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Like, basically, it's a bunch of progressive intellectuals, writers, artists that sort of figured out the whole, gambit of higher education is just pretty toxic in terms of just what it demands of students and professors. And as a result of all of that, including like debt education, it directly and indirectly in different various ways closes down the ability for us to kind of advance knowledge structures that will help us overcome and address some of the most vexing problems that we face. So it's essentially just a collective of intellectuals that came together. We're different than, say, just take some classes with us, like Master Course or something like that, because we actually have accredited degree programs in the European Union, and our community is pretty tight. We actually invest in graduates who start interesting, like green kinds of businesses. And then also, if you graduate from one of our degree programs, again, at debt-free levels, you become a co-owner with faculty and supporters. So we're all in this together. And in other words, we flip the script with respect to the traditional, like, neoliberal education model, like at the state university or the private liberal arts college. Namely, not only are you not in debt when you graduate, but you actually have assets like shares, stock in GCAS. So that's sort of the model. We also have a crypto component, which we can talk about later, but that's essentially the core of the model. It's been running for 8+ years. We're on our 9th year. We're sustainable financially. We work with really amazing people like Oliver Stone, people that you'll be interviewing here soon. Even Gaga's taught a course for us, for example. Yeah, and it's been a wild ride. Definitely exposes a lot of the weaknesses of the left by starting a progressive, accredited university where you have super egos that want to actually rely on the system itself, like the corrupt system itself, to bolster their egos. And as a result, you start to question some of their writings just because they're radical and they're amazing in terms of their writings, but in terms of their actual, like, what do they stand for, and are they willing to make sacrifices for the future so students aren't into debt and those kind of things? Like, you just realize you figure that stuff out pretty soon. And our first year was volatile because of that. But everything has settled down since. We have amazing people working with us. Alain Badiou was one of our presidents. Now Louis Gordon's our honorary president. Osvar Hussain is our vice president. So, it's pretty sweet. Next month, we're having like the Pulitzer Prize winning writer, Chris Hedges, who's part of what we're doing, talking about his most recent book. And we'll have a Nobel laureate who, came up with those microfinancing things. I mean, he's controversial and for sure, but he's definitely an economist. And we're actually launching a very progressive financial bachelor's degree program in finance to figure out ways that the left and the principles that really keep the left together, if such things exist nowadays, you have to fight for them, namely like the commons, caring for the least of us, justice issues, fairness, those basic things. And so we're starting a finance bachelor's degree program with Ann Rutledge, who's like a legend on Wall Street for various reasons. So we're organizing that. We have a philosophy master's program.
Well, I want to ask you a couple questions about like the different ways that GCAS is structured. It's divided into 10 institutes, and critical philosophy is the first one listed when I looked you up. What is the difference between critical philosophy and critical theory from a GCAS perspective?
We set up early on. So you're looking off of our Wikipedia page. And so early on, we had institutes and now those institutes have sort of folded into departments. So the Wikipedia page needs to be updated. And we do have the Institute of Psychoanalysis. But to answer your question, like the difference between critical philosophy and critical theory, it's a stylistic approach question. I think it's how you end up approaching certain figures in philosophy, in critical theory, whether you're, strong with the Frankfurt School, for example, that sort of mediates the Western capitalist position and the Eastern Stalinist position or the Soviet position. And Lukács was sort of on the east side of that, whereas like people like Adorno and Horkheimer are on the west side. So that's like a critical theory in its classic sense, in the Frankfurt School sense. But we try to open that up a little bit just by expanding it into more like feminist positions, more gender issues, more with the focus certainly on the same kinds of things that Adorno and Horkheimer were dealing with, and Marcuse with respect to cultural studies, a social theory that's thick. In fact, one of our institutes we partner with, Institutio 17. By the way, there's a little wind here. Can you hear? Is there wind?
It's okay. You're fine. Your voice is fine. Okay. I hear a little bit of wind, but it's okay.
Okay. So part of one of the institutes we partner with, Institutio 17 in Mexico City, Benjamin, his grandfather was part of the original Frankfurt School in the psychoanalytic side. So, we do like as you do, right, the Lacanian psychoanalytic structure side in different ways, right, from Jameson Webster to like what you do, right, to Zizek and Badiou. So, it's pretty wide variety of Lacanianisms going on there. But at the same time, we also do social theory and anthropology, so, and we're building those departments. Like, we're pretty tiny. We have we've only taught 10,000 students worldwide. So we're still in the process of developing. We have centers around the world. Like, we just have one just started up in the Berkshire Mountains in the east part of the United States, but we have some in Uganda, some in Latin America, for example, Santiago, Chile, Sydney, Australia, Jakarta, and so on. So what we're trying to do is sort of localize different knowledge structures and learning possibilities, and then also figure out ways that those localized nodes, we call them nodes, come together and synergize each other in different ways. So we have like what you call like a Jedi Council once a year where all the nodes meet up and we figure out like what strategies and tactics should we take with each other next? What are some basic issues that we need to be tackling? And at first, originally, it was like economic issues. Like, how do we give access to people who are super smart in the developing world who could never come to Europe or the US or Canada to study? How do we give them access in a way that makes our financial balance sheet function? Mm-hmm. And the way we did that was through our cryptocurrency. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Okay, so the question I have about the way this works is this mostly online courses, or do people go to a physical building for GCAS? If I were to become a student at GCAS, what should I expect? And would I be able to get a traditional graduate degree in philosophy, say, or would I be able to get a degree in psychoanalysis or psychology? Or
no, it's a good question. What do you expect? Well, with COVID, you expect what everything's happening. It looks like there's the new wave of lockdowns is coming. So we're still, exactly. We're still on the remote side of things. Although we materialize ourselves. It's kind of Deleuzian in structure. So you think of molecular structures where it's virtual and actual, and in sort of a way that we materialize ourselves in different parts of the world, wherever there's a kind of need for intellectual like synergy. For example, in Havana, we had a seminar there, or in Paris with Rigori, or it's a Centre Pompidou where we partner with them in Paris, or wherever in Dublin.
How long would a seminar last?
When people are flying all over the world, we want to make sure we're using our resources the best we can. So it can be a week to 2 weeks, sometimes longer. So, like our Athens conference where we had several thousand people, that was 4 days, basically 5 days. And, that was pretty significant conference. But
and I would go to that conference, and at the end of it, I would take a test, or I would turn in a paper, and I would get an accreditation.
You would get credits towards a degree that you could continue doing while we're online in platforms like we're in now, or Zoom or whatever.
Oh, okay, so you have like online courses that are ongoing, and then you have occasional seminars, which would also give you credits. I see.
Which we're hoping to get you into Ireland in May, because those dates are starting to solidify with Alfie and others, and Jameson, Webster, and so on. So we can talk about that later, but that'll be one instance in which there's a kind of materialization of ideas that you can earn credits towards a degree.
Okay, so like just to keep that as a great example for people who might be interested here, I might be hired on to come in and teach a seminar in Ireland, which would be great fun. And then that would be part of, I'm going to guess, the literature department for GCAS.
Media, it could be a hybrid, right? We're interdisciplinary. It could be hybrid.
Okay. Oh yeah, great. If I teach in like a course in podcasting and YouTube, right, and from the left, say,
exactly,
then that could be part of an overall degree that someone's earning in communications or media for GCAS, and they could take that as additional credits towards that degree. It would be a 4-day or a week-long seminar.
That's right.
But they would also be taking other courses.
That's right. And so you would be like, and that's exactly the model, right? You're an expert in certain things, so why not teach in that? And what's different from that than, let's say, the master class, like, for example, we saw on social media, like Cornell West saying, learn how to think in masterclass. Well, the difference between what we're doing and what that's all about is vast. Namely, there you just pay $100 and you can download 15 short little snippets from Cornell West, right? And you don't have any kind of conversation across horizontally with peer-to-peer, P2P, right? And what we do is we've created that ecosystem in which, you know, we do classes in English and in Spanish, like, and we have this hybrid way to work together to synergize our individual research as well as our overall approach. And it's much different, much obviously because it's accredited. Now, some of our programs, I should say, are accredited in the European Union and some have yet to be. So we're still moving in that direction to put online, but some of them are already accredited in the European Union, which is really.
Is there any? I'll cut this out if it's a sore topic, and I don't think it will be. But do you have any relationship to the European Graduate School?
Oh yeah, I mean, early on we started with the started working with the European Graduate School (EGS), and I was actually appointed on faculty there in 2013 by Wolfgang, but I think that in the end, they started to move in a different direction than what we were doing. Because at first they were recognizing, I think the agreement, I could be wrong here, but it's been 8 years. The original agreement was folks can take some courses with us and then use that as a way to work towards a degree with them. But now that we're accredited, you know, we certainly would like to work with people, EDS and others.
You share faculty with them, is all I'm thinking.
Yeah, right? we share similar interests. I think the biggest difference is our economic model. We really care about pedagogy that's delivered in a way that doesn't put students into harm, namely, put people into debt. Like, why? So our model is different because, you know, again, just to say these things, you graduate from us, you're not in debt, and you actually have assets and ownership and decision making as a result of ownership in GCAS in the future. So it's different model, but we're open to working with different. In fact, we're partnering with a university in Brazil, university in Colombia. I just got back from Bogota a week or so ago, and yeah, and I love to do what I do. Like, you travel and you meet people, you put together conferences or symposium, or maybe even just an event, and you figure out ways of learning that accelerates one's own position and exposes blind spots that we all have in just by virtue of, like, we're not infinite brains, but if we work together, we can move closer to that possibility. And by putting, you know, P2P stuff together, interesting things like, let's put Badu together with, like, you know, I don't know, like Lacanians, and see what happens. Or you know, like, and it's incredible the kind of diversity that humans have. But what we're trying to do is capture that, not as like extraction, like you extract gold from the bowels of the earth or something, but rather to accelerate our differences and our gifts intellectually, and try to materialize different environments where we put ourselves and our future into less precarity together. And that's possible. But it's like, if we're relying on the nation state to do these things, although then, you know, a strong nation state, a strong central government that holds things into check is important. But if you've looked since the 70s, I think most of us can agree that the nation state has really sided with the corporate approach to the world, like extract profits, exploit workers, or send jobs overseas to save money on labor and so on. And it's really not healthy for the environment. It's not healthy for each other. It's not healthy for communities. So other configurations need to be put together. And GCAS is one such configuration among an infinite possible other configurations.
So okay, you've had 10,000 students come in so far, and I'm not sure how long this model has been implemented, where they get shares in the institution in exchange for their tuition fees. But if that's so, then you have something like 10,000 shareholders, not including you and the faculty, and so
that would be right. That you're right. Your instincts are right on that. The difference is we have students who work with us on the e-school side, Okay, so that's just public stuff. You can just come in and take a course for, you know, 100 euros from somebody, an expert. It doesn't make you a student of ours. Okay, so I was using the student equivocally. Degree students who graduate become co-owners. And so far we've had 12 graduates because our degree programs started in 2017.
Oh, I see. So if I were as a student that was just going to the e-school side and I took a course for 100 euros, would that transfer to another institution?
No, unless you took it for credit, ECTS credits, which is the European Credit Transfer System.
So in some places it might, right?
It may, yeah, absolutely. But it's not set up that way.
Would it cost more to do it that way?
It would cost more for total credit transfer just because of the paperwork and the admin that's required. Mm-hmm. But some universities will accept that already just because our reputation is top. You know, it's actually somebody was telling me I think a missions director was saying it's harder to get into what we're doing than at Harvard because we're so selective about we're selective about the degree program researchers. We call
gotcha.
researchers.
Yeah. So GCAS is kind of like two things. It's like a better version of the great courses or the master class, where you have more interaction and with the other students and with the professor or the instructor than you would with the master class. But you would take that for self-education autodidactically. You wouldn't take that for a degree.
You could, and then to a degree, like
later on, you could, right?
Yeah, if you're really good at what you're doing, then we reach out to you and invite you to apply. Now, anybody can apply, of course, but the e-school, if you will, is a kind of way of us, kind of getting to know each other, and that process of getting to know each other because it's co-owned on the other side by degree graduates of degree programs. Then we want to get to know each other. We want to be able to work with one another for the next 40, 50 years or whatever it would be. So, right. We're trying to be as multifaceted as possible. Some of our e-school courses will translate for credit. Depends on, the school of record.
Like if I'm in a school in the United States, probably not. But if I'm in school in France or Italy, it's a possibility.
It's possible. It's possible in the U.S. Like we've had our first graduates from our PhD program, they've all gotten jobs in the academy, and so we're doing. That's another measure. Like if you're just creating another school with diplomas and it's just like a vanity diploma, like what's the point? So that the traction on the other side is working. But it's also working in different ways than we didn't think were around when we first created this. For example, some of our PhD researchers who have graduated can start now teaching undergrads. And so it's a way for us to keep our ecosystem with people who've gone through it and be able to teach next generation. So it's generational. It's incredible. Actually, to be honest with you, Doug, I've taught, I was promoted to an associate professor here at Rollins College, just down the street, actually, from where I am now. And, just teaching Marx or teaching just basic principles about history, about how it's important to stand up against fascism, how it's important to tax people so that everybody has a fair share and those kinds of things, those basic principles. And you're teaching these things knowing that everybody who's sitting in your class is going into massive debt just to learn about how to be emancipated historically, consciously, how to implement certain common principles into society. And you're realizing you're putting them into grave danger economically, even though you might be teaching some really badass stuff and they might be learning it and using some of those materials. But at the end of the day, they actually have to get a job because they have to pay back their student loans. And that actually, in my opinion, that kind of that really compromises the pedagogical trusting connectors that have to go on, not just between P2P, but also between professors who hopefully are in that P2P network, not in a hierarchical one with researchers or students. And so the difference between what we're doing when you teach is it's so much more interesting because you're not putting them into debt. And in fact, if they're really good and they graduate, they become co-owners with you. So in other words, when you're already teasing out finer points of the hermeneutical tradition or the whatever, the different texts that you're working with, you're already working with a colleague that is a co-owner, a collective co-owner of the commons of what we call GCAS. That's an infinite difference when you're actually trusting each other.
Yeah, I would imagine that after, I don't know, maybe given how long it's taking to get 12 students out with a degree, maybe it would take a long time. But eventually, you're going to get to a point where you have hundreds of co-owners, and that model of bringing every student in as a every graduate in as a co-owner will no longer be tenable. Do you think
it's tenable? It is actually tenable with a couple of things. You're right about the equity cap, certainly, right? And everybody's piece of the pie. But what you end up doing is you cut the pieces smaller and smaller as you grow in maturity, as you mature.
Right.
But each of the pieces that are smaller, let's say, than the first couple generations of students are worth different. They're worth in different ways.
So you expect that GCAS valuation will continue to go up and up and up?
Well, that's the idea, right? So if we have people who are doing amazing things with knowledge structures of developing new technologies, which we're already working on in different ways, gamings to blockchain to decentralized teaching styles and all this, whatever. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. Now, what we don't want to sound like is this whole idea of like the corporate capitalist model that everything must continue growing in value over time. That's not our notion of value. Is not tied necessarily to the euro or the dollar, right?
It's right, but it is tied to economic growth or value, growth and value. Yeah,
absolutely. I wouldn't say no to that, but it's an economic model that we actively share in together and we collectively co-own. And then, we have shareholder meetings. We'll have shareholder meetings where we can discuss how do we divide this out? Do we want to buy a campus? Do we want dividends? Do we want to grow in this way or that way? And we figure out the best way for a GCAS college to grow our mission and ecosystem together collectively.
So you've got a whole bunch of different academics, on your faculty. In other words, not just academics, but really well-known intellectuals, artists, like you mentioned, Oliver Stone. This has been a really interesting conversation, and we've had lots of meetings, and I've understood what you've been telling me pretty well, and wanted to get on board with GCAS primarily just because of the list of your faculty and the people and the things that I've seen in the seminars I've experienced online and Alfie's recommendation. But now I think I've got a better understanding of GCAS than I did before, and I like it. But I also want to tell you, all right, like Diet Soap Media, we're going to be a business, right? We have shareholders, we have investors, we've got equity and all of the stuff. And our aim is to grow the company and become more and more valuable over time.
Sure.
But the content, the ideas that we're producing are such that my ultimate aim, my utopian aim, is for all of this whole model to be worthless. But by the time, after, I don't know, 20 years or something, that the foundation of the economy, for it to be transformed through worker rebellion, worker revolution, and the education is about helping people take hold of the situation they're in, including myself, because it's sort of an autodidactic process for me, but also to provide those tools to people. And while I'm creating a business, that's because that's my only real option to continue doing the work that I want to do. That's not the horizon of possibility for me, right? Is this model of Diet Soap Media. Now, I'm not attached to bringing every author in as a co-owner. You know, it's a more traditional company than GCAS is, and perhaps there's something to bringing each student in as a co-owner that's more progressive. But I still I wonder if, you know, from my Marxist perspective, I feel as though, yeah, that's good, but ultimately you're going to have to emancipate the working class to get the kinds of ideas and the kind of human life that we want
Yeah,
to
that's
be
right.
livable.
And you know, again, part of that is there are different angles and different strategies and tactics that different locales or different organizations can maneuver with. And one of ours is let's just keep really smart young people out of debt so that their brain power and their skill sets can be maximized so that they don't have to collapse into the given corporate like employment model that's currently afoot or that dominates capital.
Well, I mean, are your tuitions lower than a traditional university?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, ours, you know, it's an average around 3,000 a year for tuition for us. Sometimes less. It depends on where you're coming from.
And you're buying into the company when you do that.
Exactly. So
Right.
when you write that check out to GCAS for tuition for the first year of your bachelor's degree for a couple €1,000, that's actually an investment when you graduate. Now, if you don't graduate, you don't qualify, right? That's the agreement that we have with oncoming.
But you'll figure out pretty quickly whether or not you want to keep going or whether or not you just want to treat it like a signing up for great courses or an e-school.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. I mean, the good thing
the student would, right? I mean, you're a student.
True. Yeah.
You know, you take a course or two and you decide, oh, I'm not getting much out of this, and you drop out.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have spent that. You wouldn't even necessarily had to spend $3,000.
No, you could spend $100, you know, like
right.
and check it out, but still work with really expert people. But again, you're right. It might not just be, you know, the online thing might not work for everybody, and certainly it's a challenge. It's challenging for me. I'll be honest.
So let's talk about the different departments here. With like psychoanalysis is one of the departments you have.
Yeah.
Do people who go through that program get trained in psychoanalysis so that they could become psychoanalysts themselves?
That's a good question. No, because to become a psychoanalyst and to be recognized, you actually have to be recognized at the local or state level. And we can't be certified in 50 states in the U.S. while teaching in Dublin, right? While our headquarters in Dublin.
So you would have that degree, and then you could go on from there. And is there a test, or would you have to?
So we have degrees, but we also have a certificate program that lasts a year. And once you're finished with that, taking your required courses with like, you know, Jameson or with whomever, like it will be teaching. Vanessa Sinclair or Isabel Millar or whenever, maybe even Alfie. But once you're finished taking the required courses, then you take an exam. And if you pass the exam, you get a certificate that basically says you've been trained in the theoretical models of Lacanian psychoanalysis. Okay. So, and you know, what will that do for you? I have no idea. Like it's important to raise awareness.
You could teach.
You could teach, certainly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but if you wanted to become a psychoanalyst, you probably have to get an additional degree.
Yeah, well, you have to get it certified by your state to be recognized. And the problem with being a psychoanalyst as opposed to a psychotherapist is that in most states, there might be one or two states, if I'm correct, that recognizes psychoanalysis as like like anybody who would come and be your client or MSN could claim insurance. That's
right.
Everything is about who can claim insurance and who can't. And if you're a psychoanalyst in the United States, good luck with that. Right. So
right. Yeah. You'd have to be in a major metropolitan area and have a short list of clients who are willing to pay you outside of the health insurance system.
That's right.
You know, so you're talking about millionaires only.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're talking about pretty people who can afford $12,000 a year.
And I'm sure psychoanalyzing them will be a treat.
Oh, oh, absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
I've never had that privilege, but Bruce Frank was my analyst. I went through some training, but I never completed my training. I ended up starting GCAS instead. So
okay, but you come out of that side of it, out of the psychoanalytic Lacanian side of GCAS. That's where your primary interest is, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be, I guess, when I first started like 8-9 years ago, but now it's more like I'm really interested in disruptive technologies that can disrupt the capitalist centralization of like how money works, how labor works. I'm interested in technologies that will disrupt that through like rogue or avant-garde organizations that put stuff up and figure out ways of synergizing to solve certain local or national, international problems. One being education, okay, but there would be other ones too, more strategic issues having to do with like, how do we get somebody in office that represents like a Bernie Sanders, or those more strategic, tactical aspects. So that's what I'm really interested in now. I'm reading more. Thank you. I'm reading more into different technologies, AI, in a way that big data, in a way that we're able to figure out outcomes that big data would be unable to do just by the size, the actual insane size of their data analysis. So I'm interested in counterfactual disruptive technologies and how those work.
When I started this media company, we went through a list of names for the book publishing side.
Yeah.
And we ended up with Sublation Press is what we're going to call it.
Nice.
But one of the names was Disruptor Press.
There you go.
And the reason why I wanted to call it Disruptor was because I thought that the term disruptor had been co-opted by big tech in a way that was basically limiting the level of disruption.
And right wing, typically libertarian.
Libertarian, right wing, big entrepreneur kind of, and big business, Elon Musk type energy, exactly. Right? Yeah. And I thought, well, I think Elon Musk is a cuck, and that the real disruptors are the Marxists that would come along and change the mode of production on a much more fundamental level than any of these communication technologies might.
I think a question that's right at the heart of what we're talking about, this may be unspoken right now, and it'd be awesome to like have a conversation or even teach a course together on this, is the hidden premise that has to be operating for that to function, for Marxists to be disruptors, for example. Namely, and this is the hidden premise, social organization. It's a question of how do you organize in a capitalist ideological system, structure, framework that precludes certain forms of organization, certain forms of consciousness development. And ultimately, I mean, we've been under the gun since the 70s, basically the whole of our lives, Doug, you and me, in psychologically trained to think it's just me out there. And I might be able to trust one or two other people in my lifetime, but unless we're able to horizontalize trusting working relationships, then that premise that we need to be operating for disruption to actually function, namely trust through each other and visions that we're all not fighting over, like, oh, it's a gender issue. No, it's a gay or lesbian issue. No, it's a race issue. No, it's a class issue. Like all these divisive, shotgun, disparate ways that the left functions now, and the minimal ways in which we're able to even get together. Like maybe a pride parade would get us together to like hang out. But that, it's like the hidden premise needs to be built up. And part of that is like what I think GCAS is hoping to be part of that, not a solution. I'm not here touting like we found the way. We don't know, what that looks like, but we do know that we need to start figuring out our psychologies of trusting relationships in a much more deeper, profound way than we've seen since the 60s. And we haven't been able to do that.
Before I got you on the line, I was watching a little presentation you gave in 2014. It was about the fake left and why GCAS was necessary.
Yeah.
And
that was in Slovenia. Oh no, that was in Macedonia. That's crazy. I'm sorry that you had to suffer through that, Doug.
No, it was fine. It seemed interesting, and you didn't have your glasses, so you were improvising.
Yeah, I was definitely like, what's going on with this?
Yeah, but you did tell a story which I thought was interesting, a little anecdote about being at a bookstore, reading a novel, and a woman coming up to you and saying, "Oh, you're reading that novel. I love that author. That's my favorite author," and having a conversation with her, where you felt that she was maybe a little overly friendly, but she, at the end of the conversation, invited you to her house for tea. And I got the impression this was, an older woman, that you at that time, this was 2014. You're not that old a guy now. You were younger, even younger then. You looked great. And I imagine this older woman inviting you to her house for tea. And then, but you get there and you knock on the door and she's flabbergasted. She's surprised that you show up.
Right.
Because it was only a gesture. It was an invitation meant to be rejected.
Yes.
Yeah. and you took it seriously.
I did. Unfortunately.
And you point to that kind of constant offering of an empty gesture as definitive of a certain neoliberal individualism,
especially on the left. Like, these professors that are very privileged by the traditional neoliberal debt creating education machine and publishing too. Like, I published with Columbia University and Duke and MIT, right? But the gambit is you can be a very privileged professor at the top echelon at NYU or at the New School or wherever, Berkeley, and everything you do reproduces the same conditions that debt keeps maximizing or keeps accelerating through. And this is the question that Althusser asks in his ISA essay. If you don't know that, it's the ideological state apparatus. You have to read that. It's a fundamental text in the mid part of the 20th century. And he asks the basic question, how the hell is capitalism keep reproducing itself with all the contradictions? It should have collapsed by now, but it hasn't. And so we take that same question and say, how can we reproduce education that will boost knowledge production and reduce debt and free up and emancipate and take that word very seriously, our young generation? How do we reproduce the conditions of debt-free education that's open, and one of the way you can't do that is through the traditional model, because it keeps reproducing debt and it keeps enslaving us to banks.
And when you say the traditional, you mean the neoliberal model?
The neoliberal model is the traditional model of education, debt creating machine.
Now, I mean, like I remember in 1968, I wrote a novel about 1968 in Paris, and there were two universities that were primarily involved at the beginning of the
Paris 8. Yep.
Well, it was Nanterre.
Okay.
Yeah, and Nanterre, which may have been Paris 8, but it was the Sorbonne and Nanterre. And Nanterre is a suburb of Paris, and it's
that's right. Yeah,
it's an Americanized university. It was built like in 1964.
Yeah.
And by 1968, it was one of the centers of disruption. And what you had there was like working class kids going to university for the first time. These were not people who were meant to be going to university. They're being educated after, as adults, because there was not quite enough room in the factory system for them yet. While the unemployment rate wasn't really high by today's standard, it was going up past a point where it had been historically expected to. And there was this sort of holding pen for working class kids, and part of it was Nanterre, and yet they were also being educated. They were really being taught, and they had some, like Henri Lefebvre, I think, was at Nanterre. And so they were being given a radical education, and they were being expected to wait to enter a working class which would a working class life and a working class position, which would be fundamentally inhumane, and which would have there would be no progress for them once they got into the factory system, and they along with the upper class kids at the Sorbonne rejected that condition, but they were not put into debt. They were waiting for the ability to make a living without having to turn around and pay off everything they earned to these private educational institutions. Today, the situation is even more intense because lots and lots and lots in the United States, a ton of working class people end up in university, and they all end up in debt. So, anyway, I feel like education with every generation of youth is this moment of education is a risky moment.
It's a risky moment, and that's where you have to create bold initiatives, and initiatives that aren't going to hedge or fold to banks or hedge funds. I mean, let's face it, Harvard, the top 4 hedge fund managers at Harvard University make 85% of the entire faculty combined, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not there designed for advancing human knowledge and consciousness. It's there to buy up more property like NYU does in Soho and or Columbia in the Upper West Side or wherever you might be. I mean, that universities today are less concerned about advancing knowledge and way more concerned about hedge funds making their endowments increase more and more. And so you have to make bold initiatives. I would love to read your novel, but you're exactly right. I mean, and in Europe, of course, education is almost all free at the undergraduate level. Not entirely, though. It's changing. And then if you're into master's or PhD, it's not funded like it used to be at all. So this neoliberal model that started in the States with Reagan in '82, when he said education is about you're taking on your own entrepreneurialism. And so you invest in your education yourself that will pay off down the road. Well, I mean, does it pay off?
You've taken that. GCAS has taken that on.
Yes.
Okay, we will literally invest in your education.
Yes.
We'll be a shareholder in your, institution.
Yeah. Exactly. What the state used to do by funding education at the public level and even at the private level, Reagan's platform and the whole Republican platform in the 80s was cut taxes. And everybody loves that shit, right? I mean, like, who wouldn't be against cutting their own taxes base or whatever? But what that meant was he dried up the resources for educating the population. And then you have to jack up tuition and put that burden on the individual, which, of course, you could all have them just sign on the line, and they're $100,000 in debt with a bachelor's degree. And then you wonder 25, 30, 40 years down the road, like where we are now, why there's so many people who are educated, have degrees, but are absolutely buy into these QAnon conspiracies, these bullshit, like complete false realities. And it's, again, it's about producing paper with a degree on it and not producing advancing knowledge in terms of critically engaging. Why is it that the working class every year have less and less power? Why is it that the unions are now at 7-8% nationwide when it used to be, far, 3 or 4 or 5 times more than that, up in the 60s, depending on the industry, right, or sector? And why is it that you have a big lie like this orange freak is peddling? Why is that even entertained? Why does CNN make so much goddamn money running stories about that orange freak over and over? Because it sells. Like, we're in these loops that we have to figure out ways, creating alternative cultures, and by culture, I mean economic. It's not just this. That's, again, sorry, Doug, I'm really passionate about this. So just one more quick, like, soapbox on top of a soapbox.
Yeah, that's fine. You're high up in the air there.
Yeah, so I'm about ready to fall into the pool. But one last moment before Icarus burns his wings here, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
It's, in the 70s, in the Powell memo, or you're familiar with the Powell memo. If you're not, you all should read the Powell memo. Basically, in the 60s, Cultural Revolution nearly seized the modes of production, cultural modes of production. And that freaked the corporate world out. And Powell wrote a memo that's now famous about how to undermine left-wing progressive politics, economics, and the whole gambit. And one of the key points, bullet points that he makes that is on the pillar of which his whole memo rests is you have to sink the education sector. And how do you do that? You dry up the funds, Reagan, and then you force people into debt. And then what this does is professors in the 80s were all about like, you know, feminist issues, 70s and 80s, feminist issues, women issues, really important issues. Trans, less trans, and trans came in the mid 90s, late 90s, whatever. But they're all like celebrating these advancements. Great, yay. All the while, they're putting their students more and more into debt. In other words, the economic mode of education production for the student side, they lost all kinds of grounds at the same time where, you know, you have these progressive policies and these progressive like women's studies programs, whatever, all implemented in the 80s. And so you have on the face of it, everything's looking great. Yay. Diversity. Yay. But the reality is economically, you're collapsing the working and middle class in the education sector. And now it's come home to roost. What's that expression that Malcolm X used to use?
Yeah, the chickens have come home to roost.
Yes,
you know.
And we're facing that. And that's why GCAS, if you will, and now I'm about ready to fall off my soapbox, my diet soapbox. That's why GCAS is so key. I'm done.
All right, great. Well, listen, I feel as though we gave part of me felt like this whole conversation was a little bit like an infomercial from the 80s, you know?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
That's most on the other hand, I have my hair. I do have the hairdo from the 90s to help with that.
Yeah, that does it. You look great. But then on the other hand, it was like, what if you took one of those infomercials from the 80s and you deturned it and you had the guy go, hey, are these ginseng knives really that sharp? What the fuck are you trying to pull here? and the guy's like, no. Let me, let me tell you the history of knives. And and that's what we had here on this was like.
Well, I hope so. And for those of you listening, check us out. If you email us at contact@gcas.ie, we'll give you a free class. We do free courses all the time. You can check it out for free. And if you like it, you want to fall into this or be part of it, and also be part of what Doug's doing with Diet Soap.
And I'm going to be. I hope I'm going to be.
You're going to come to Ireland, and we're going to
come to Ireland to do it too. Not just sit here in my little chair, but get up on my ass, get my passport out, fly in a plane.
Fill up jacuzzis with some Diet Soap bubbles. That would be great.
Yeah, that'd be good. And I'm gonna get some I want to get Greta Thunberg on the show.
Oh yeah. She would be great to have. There's so many, I think, important voices to be heard these days.
Yeah, I mean, some of them. You sent me a list, and some of them are really well known, some of them not as well known, but they're all super interesting. And I went through your list of faculty, and I'm excited. I really am, despite the fact that I put you through the ringer a little bit today. I am really excited about partnering up with GCAS and helping you guys out, and you helping me out. And I will link to your YouTube channel and also to your main site in this in the description for this. And I'll put your logo up at the start. It will be the beginning of a beautiful.
I think I have enough logos on here, Doug.
Yeah, I know, but I'm going to put it at the beginning too with like ominous music.
Oh, that would be sweet. That sounds great. Yeah, it's important that we progressive organizations, and no matter what their corporate entity looks like, work together to create that premise, to build that premise of trust and connection and synergy. And I feel like this is a good connector. So let's.
I mean, look, if this is absolutely a project that I admire. I may not have it at GCAS and as the horizon of my radical politics, but it's a step. It's a reformist step towards a more revolutionary ambition. And I appreciate the fact that you guys have this model where the students can learn without being destroyed by the process.
Oh, God, I know, right? All right, Doug, you take care. And I'm going to jump in the pool. See ya.
Okay. All right.
Did you get that?
I did.
Good.